Welcome to 1984. New story, new guest, new episode. Today we will talk about blockchain, this technology that is changing our life, our worlds, and also businesses. And we will do it with Philipp Sandner, professor and expert of blockchain. How, Philipp, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for accepting my invitation to this podcast. And for me, it's more than a pleasure. It's an honor to talk with you because your CV speaks by itself. So your experience, you are a young scientist, you are a professor, you are founder of companies connected with the blockchain. So as I was telling in my short introduction today, we'll talk about blockchain. But first of all, I would like to ask you, how are you in this problematic time, in this very difficult time?
I'm very fine. I'm doing lots of home office. You have to know that I'm currently living in Cologne, but my work, the university, is in Frankfurt. That's 2 hours by car. And due to Corona, I don't have to travel there because I can stay at home doing lots of not homework, but home office, to make a small joke. And it's all fine because blockchain is on the rise. Bitcoin is gaining interest. Ethereum as a cryptocurrency is gaining interest. And of course, a hot topic in Germany is becoming the so-called digital programmable euro. That's basically our currency being put on a blockchain network. It will take a while. This is not going overnight, but it's a hot topic in the government, also in the European Commission, in the central bank, and so on. And therefore, I think we're having a quite fascinating time ahead in the upcoming month or next year.
Yes, I would like to ask, how came up your interest in the blockchain technology?
Yeah, I'm a person who is always interested in tech stuff and also digitization, and I typically read the US blogs, like TechCrunch and others very often. And 7 or 8 years ago, I very often read the TechCrunch blog coming from the Silicon Valley, and at that time we were having like one of the first bubbles in Bitcoin. At that time, the Bitcoin rose to a price of a little above $1,000 US. Now we are at $9,000 US, but 7 years ago, the height was at $1,000 US. It was fascinating. Bitcoin was always in the tech blogs at that point of time. And then I became interested, read a lot, researched it, and really found it interesting. And then over the next years, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it became a hobby, to really see what's happening in this blockchain field. And afterwards, I then made it to my full-time job. And now, since 4 years, I'm the head of the Frankfurt School Blockchain Center. That's an institute at the university. And there I'm doing blockchain 24/7. That's crypto assets, that's enterprise DLT, that's for companies, that's for startups. And we have a team now of around 12 people. And it's really fascinating because we see quite much happening.
Yes, I wanted to ask you later on, but because you mentioned the Bitcoin, and it's highly interconnected with the blockchain technology. I was reading a lot in the last years about the Bitcoin, so the explosion, the boom of this cryptocurrency, then something that became more or less a bubble that a bit exploded with the price that from several thousand of dollars of value of one Bitcoin then dropped and led to a risky bubble. So I would like to ask you a forecast. So the Bitcoin is still a reality or was just a temporary experience?
Well, in my personal opinion, it's a brilliant technology and we are just in the very early beginning. People are now increasingly understanding the technology. They are also increasingly understanding where Bitcoin is actually a good solution and where it is not so much of a good solution. There has been already a little bit of a buzz around Bitcoin 2 years ago when there was the last hype going on. But to be honest, I do not feel that individuals and companies are getting less attracted and less interested in Bitcoin. Rather, I have the opinion that people are getting more and more interested, especially young people are getting interested, and therefore I would see that Bitcoin and also the entire blockchain technology is just arriving and it's just diffusing, and the next 10 will be very, very exciting on this regard.
Yes,
we are just in the very early beginnings.
But don't you? So you are German, and your government is very attentive, no, to the legal side also in terms of fintech and so on. I read several articles about these things in the last weeks. Don't you think that the Bitcoin can be a risk for the legal economy? This is also a debate that we have in Italy, no, because we had several problems with the organized criminal in Italy. So, and we were discussing a lot even with the government. We were concerned about such idea, not to move from usual economy, not traditional economy, to more fintech transaction connected by Bitcoin and so on.
Actually, I think potentially you're right. Of course, it can be a risk, but everything can be a risk. So that's not a key argument here. Bitcoin at this point of time is very, very, very small. It has a capitalization of around 170 billion US dollars. Like from a German comparison, it's kind of solid. It's from a German perspective, 170 billion. That is as much as 3 or 4 large-scale companies taken together. 170 billion US dollar. That is as much as the company SAP in Germany. But if you take like the big tech from the US, then for example, take Apple having a market cap of more than 1 trillion, then you see here that Bitcoin is only having maybe 15% of valuation in comparison to Apple in the US. Yeah, or in other words, Apple is 8 times larger than Bitcoin, and here you see how that Bitcoin cannot be a systemic risk yet because it's relatively small in comparison to others. Of course, in the past there have been issues with regard to money laundering, fraud, financing of criminal activities, and so on. That's pretty much true, but the intensity that Bitcoin is being used for criminal purposes is decreasing. And to be very honest, currencies like the US dollar or the euro, they are also used for criminal activity. So this is nothing specific to Bitcoin. So therefore, that's nothing special. So therefore, to be honest, the risk for financial stability, the risk for criminal activities, the risk for money laundering and so on, to my personal opinion, is limited. And therefore, I rather see the benefits and I rather see the chances here of Bitcoin and the blockchain technology. Ultimately, the Bitcoin has a similar architecture to gold. Yeah? So gold as a physical commodity is similar to Bitcoin as let's call it digital commodity. There are like how it's gold generated, how it's Bitcoin generated. There are quite some similarities. And with gold, we also know that gold is a storage of value since 3,000 years. And gold is also not having a systematic risk, and gold is also not providing a risk for money laundering and other things. It's all nicely regulated, and in most countries it works pretty well. So with Bitcoin it's the same, but Bitcoin is much smaller than gold, so therefore I don't see these huge risks which other people are claiming. Last comment maybe for this question. Gold right now has a market capitalization of 9 trillion. Bitcoin has a market capitalization of 170 billion. So you can also see here that basically gold is, we need to compute it to be precise, but gold is 50 to 80 times larger than Bitcoin. Yeah, just to give you some numbers. Yeah, so Bitcoin is at this point of time, in comparison to gold, for example, extremely small.
If I got you well, so your definition of Bitcoin can be that the Bitcoin is a virtual commodity.
In my mind, yes. And there are many cryptocurrencies out there. You have Ethereum and Ripple and Litecoin and so on. But and all these crypto assets, they are different. But right now, we already know that Bitcoin is a digital commodity, and to be more specific, it has quite some similarity to gold, but in a digital way. But other crypto assets, for example, Ethereum and so on, other cryptocurrencies are having similarities with other commodities. So Ethereum is used, and Ethereum is basically used for transactions. So therefore, Ethereum is not being similarly like gold. In case you search for real-world examples, then Ethereum could be more being compared to a commodity like oil, for example, because you use oil for doing something. If you use it, then it's gone. That's basically quite similar to gold, and also you can dig quite much oil out of the ground, so there is not a scarce asset with regard to gold. So there are multiple aspects why you could compare Ether or Ethereum to oil and Bitcoin to gold. Of course, these comparisons have limitations. This is pretty clear, but at least to provide more information than like a random digital currency, I think these comparisons are pretty helpful.
You are in Germany. I mean, you are 3-4 steps forward than other European countries in the blockchain technology, but also in the fintech, in the Bitcoin business, and so on. So I would like, from your point of view, the German government is moving also the regulation, the law system, the legal system forward this new digital future.
Yes, indeed. I think that the reason why Germany is pushing this is that it's very important, or blockchain technology will be very important for the industry, like the machinery companies, the automotive companies, the engineering companies sitting in Germany. For them, blockchain will be very important, especially once that we have the digital euro being running on a blockchain-based system. That's exactly the point in time when blockchain and, for example, manufacturing, engineering, and automotive will have an intersection, right? Plus, the German federal government sits in Berlin, and you have a quite interesting blockchain ecosystem existing also in Berlin. So you have quite some interesting spillovers taking place from blockchain startups, blockchain experts, and entrepreneurs in Berlin towards the government, such that you have some inspiration. And this is why, in my mind, that associations such as the German Association of Banks, but also the Federal Ministry of Finance in Germany, they all know cryptocurrencies and blockchain now quite well. Why is this? Because they are sitting in Berlin, and they are quite, to some degree, connected to the ecosystem. So you have knowledge being transmitted, and this apparently works quite well. And therefore, I think that the German government in Berlin and also the ministries, they not necessarily just saw the risks of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, but they also saw the chances for the German industry or the European industry. And that's why they took a quite positive approach for regulating it. And at the same time, they would like to reduce the risk of money laundering, tax evasion, and so on. And if you would like to reduce such risks, then you have to regulate it. And that's exactly what happens now in January this year, when in Germany a new law came into force, which now regulates the custody of cryptocurrencies.
So very, very interesting. Just to use a parallel, no? In the US we have the Silicon Valley now. A couple of years that Malaysia is playing the role of the new digital free zone. If you heard, no? So Malaysia is trying to become, let me say, the hub for the Asian Pacific of the digital world, just to be a small but important competitors to China. So maybe Frankfurt is the Bitcoin and blockchain Silicon Valley for the European Union.
Actually, that would be great, but I think it's not the case yet. I think the Silicon Valley for the blockchain world, it's existing in Europe, and this is primarily Switzerland, like the area of Zurich and Zug. I think you have a quite high density of blockchain experts and blockchain companies there. But in Germany, all the expertise of blockchain is scattered across the entire country. You have good startups in Berlin, some of them are in Frankfurt, others in Munich, but there is no agglomeration as in Switzerland, for example. Therefore, it would be great to have a Silicon Valley of blockchain in Germany, but I think it's rather in Switzerland, to be honest.
But I think that from my point of view, if we look not only from the German point of view, but the European point of view. So Frankfurt is also the headquarters of the European Central Bank. So if we want at European level, being both of us European Union citizens, I think that an higher effort from the, let me say, the Frankfurt school of blockchain and fintech, I think that can be an accelerator to a reform of this system in the European Union.
Yes, I think you're right. We are doing as much as we can, and it develops quite nicely. We have good companies in Frankfurt who are at the forefront of what is possible in the blockchain area. For example, Commerzbank or Deutsche Börse. Also, Deutsche Bahn, that's the railway company, and so on. They are really pushing blockchain. We also have quite a significant number of excellent startups in Frankfurt. Then we, as a university, we are really pushing this topic, and therefore we indeed have a small ecosystem in Frankfurt. But I would still think that the Berlin ecosystem is larger, and even much larger in comparison to Berlin is the entire Swiss ecosystem. Yeah, so therefore, I think you're right. The ecosystem is emerging. Also in Munich, by the way. Also in northern Italy, by the way. That's what I have heard, and also in London and in the Baltic countries in Northern Europe. So you have these ecosystems emerging everywhere. But the largest agglomeration of blockchain expertise, I guess, is in Switzerland.
Yes, I heard, and I had the possibility to analyze a bit from my political, let me say, point of view and Europolitical point of view. The Estonia, is becoming is the most digitalized country in the European Union. Everything is quite digital, but of course, Estonia is a small country and is different to manage a country as Italy or Spain or Germany. So with a high density of people and with more problem, in technical and even in terms of legislation. But just to move from the Bitcoin to the other potential of the blockchain, what do you think? Can in the future use the blockchain technology to provide the service to our citizens? For example, transfer of document in a safe way between the administration, or even as we are talking with Dieter Brockmeyer, our common friend, the digital and human diplomacy. Also this is an issue, because if we use the traditional cable, we know that hackers as Anonymous or as happened other illegal organization could leak easily this document and then put at risk the reputation of a state. So can you just give us an overview of the other solution that the blockchain can offer to us as citizens and in business and as a government at all?
Yes, of course. So let's define blockchain quickly. It's much easier to explain blockchain when I have a board, a pen, and I can draw a little image and so on. So it's difficult just to explain blockchain via audio. But if you really lay it down, what exactly is blockchain from a conceptual perspective, then blockchain can be explained best as framing it as an register technology. Yeah. So it's a technology to maintain a register. And what is a register doing? A register is basically organizing things. A register is organizing property of things. And a register clearly says who is owning what. And therefore, if you now think about registers organizing our societies, then you also can quite nicely think about blockchain technology. This means, for example, you can ask yourself, what is organized in a register? For example, money is organized in a register. You have a banknote. On the banknote, there is a number, so the banknote is numbered, and therefore money is also part of a register. Then you have stocks. Stocks are also part of a register. That's pretty clear. You have cars on the street. Cars are also organized by a register. That's the car register organizing ownership of the cars. Then you have identities, for example, identities of companies. That's the commercial register. Every company is having a commercial register certificate, which is proving that the company is organized by some kind of register. That's the commercial register. And the last one to mention is basically the register for human beings. That's basically the passport or the identity card, where you have a number on the identity card. That's basically proving that, again, it's a register for human beings maintained by the government, right? All these things are organized as registers, and all these things are partly more, partly less, good candidates to be also ran on a blockchain-based system. Currently, in Germany and also in the European Commission, for example, it's more and more discussed whether, for example, the euro as a currency should be run on a blockchain-based solution that's basically using the register functionality of a blockchain network to run the euro, right? Then you have quite in Europe a couple of interesting projects and startups in the area of identity. That's basically the approach for putting personal identities on a blockchain network, which have very fascinating implications because, yes, my identity would be stored on a blockchain network. For those people who are not too much into blockchain technology, this sounds very scary because then they would argue that that my data is stored on some kind of distributed IT system. But it has it's not that bad actually. It's really amazing because this would be technically done in a way such that my personal data, my birth date, my blood values, my diseases, everything which defines me as a human being is actually potentially stored in a distributed system, yes, but it's stored in an encrypted way, plus the only person who can access the data is me. So my data is not stored in a database system where, for example, Facebook can access the data or an insurance company can access the data. No, the data is stored in a system and only I have the password to access the data. And if somebody would like to analyze my data, say an insurance company or something like this, then they would have to ask me. I would basically grant access to a small subset of my data, and then the insurance company would have like a little tiny bit of my data to be analyzed, right? But they would not have my entire profile freely available as it is now with Facebook and some other companies, right? And therefore, identity management with blockchain technology is really a killer application. It's difficult to understand, but it's a killer application because it allows storing identities in non-central databases, such that only I, as a human being, can access my data. I can also organize access to the data to allow people who want to read my data. And then there is no database anymore where all these profiles, all these data of myself are being stored. And if this is the case, then there is no company such as Facebook and others who can actually read and monetize my data. And therefore, that's basically the big hopes in the blockchain area, also on behalf of the European Commission and also by the German government, for example, and also like lots of other organizations, that they really hope that blockchain can hold its promises to basically break the data monetization monopolies sitting in the Silicon Valley in the US with the names Facebook, Google, Apple, and so on. Yeah, that's the big hope. It hasn't come true yet, but the likelihood is quite high that potentially blockchain technology can break these data monetization monopolies we need to see. But therefore, you see here very easily, blockchain is much more than Bitcoin, and blockchain can easily in the future be used for a broad array of, for example, registers with identity at the core, money at the core, and so on. But of course, it's always not easy to understand. Blockchain is a very difficult technology. And if you would like to, for example, start investigating blockchain, if you would like to think about moving into this blockchain space, doing a career there, and so on, then you have to expect that you have to really study blockchain technology for 5 full-time months with a high intensity, like hundreds of hours reading and understanding the material. Only after months of such studying blockchain technology, you would understand it and could then really get a footprint in the blockchain area. It's really a difficult technology to understand. This is exactly why adoption will take some time, and also understanding on behalf of senior decision makers is also taking quite a while, because these people don't have the time to simply invest 5 months to investigate this technology.
So, but I was very interested about one of your comments that the blockchain technology can break the monopoly of data collection and also
potentially
data business managed by this big corporation, not to mention, I don't know, Google, Facebook, and all these other corporations. So don't you think that this can put in risk the real development of the blockchain transformation or revolution?
Please repeat the question. I didn't understand it.
Yes, so Facebook, the big corporation, Google, they are very interested to monetize from the data collection and selling this data, to other company. As you say, potentially blockchain can break this system, this business. Don't you think that big corporation as does that I mentioned right now can a bit slow down, in form of, I don't know, lobbying and so on, this revolution, so the development of the blockchain revolution in the world?
Actually, I think the revolution of blockchain technology is going at a quite high speed, but still everybody out there seems to wait until blockchain applications are coming to us. So it always depends on the perspective you have. So I am being in the blockchain ecosystem now since 4 years. I feel that this technology develops quite quickly, but still major obstacles are still existing until we have a widespread adoption. And therefore, I feel at this point of time that we are just in the very early beginning. So imagine you would like to download a file from the internet, like a large film, like a large movie and so on. Then you download it. You start with 0%, and at some point of time, when you are about to close the download, then you are at 100%. Yeah, you know these bars indicating you the download progress. And if you take this and apply it to blockchain technology, then I would now feel that we are maybe at 1% of blockchain adoption, 1% of what's possible, indicating that the other 99% are still left for the future, representing the kind of idea that we are in the very early beginning of adoption. And everything what I have talked about, identities, also commercial register, potentially also machine-to-machine payments, and all this stuff. That's fascinating, but it will just come in the future. And right now, the foundations are being laid. Yeah, that's my feeling currently.
So we talk about really administrative use of blockchain, business, or medical use of the blockchain. That is to be really a revolution. Do you see any political use of the blockchain technology?
Yes, of course, because in case you would provide the individual identity card and the passport and so on a blockchain-based system, then you could also make processes of the public administration much more efficient. For example, registering for a new passport, registering for something with the public government, then buying, selling, or transferring ownership of real estate, for example. In Germany, you always have to go to the notary. That's an endless process with, tons of paper and tons of documents. You could make this much more efficient and more easily. And now specifically to the area of politics and democracy, what's interesting is the possibility to also run voting with a blockchain-based technology. Yeah. So right now in Germany, in case we are voting for Angela Merkel in plus 1 year, then everybody would go to a voting office, or you fill out a letter. It's tons of paper. It's extremely inefficient. You need to rely on people and their precision to not mix up any ballots once the voting is being done, you need to count it, and it takes up to 24 hours or even more until you have the final result of a voting, right? And it doesn't matter if this is like the German federal voting procedure, or whether it's only a regional county voting or voting in an association. It's always the same. It's paper-based. It's analogously happening. It's not digital, and it needs to be improved. And with blockchain technology, you would basically register people who can vote. That's the citizens. Then they can vote with their ballot digitally, and more or less in real time, or after a couple of minutes, you can like click on one button, and suddenly you see who has won the election without any fraud, with everything being digital, no fraud, no corruption possible. Just because you allow people to register digitally and do their voting on a blockchain-based system in an absolutely secure way, and it cannot be changed and manipulated by anybody. That would be a very fascinating use case, but it's also a very large use case. So we will have, it will take some time until such use cases are being generated.
So, Philipp, thank you for your time. I hope that the next time we will talk about the blockchain, the loading bar will be at least on 10 or 20%, to see the real revolution for the common man, the man on the street, as we say. And maybe we will find more interesting ins and insight for us as common citizens. And of course, as you mentioned, that it's very difficult to understand the blockchain technology like overnight. So you need time. You say that at least you need 5 months full time to understand fully this technology. I hope that this podcast will inspire some of my students, or your students, or our common friends to know more about the blockchain. And of course, I will link very interesting readings, articles which you wrote. And maybe can inspire young generation to get more interested about this technology. So, Philipp,
okay.
Thank you so much for your time. It was very interesting. Some of the most interesting podcasts that I had in the last year. So, thank you so much.
Happy to hear this. Thank you very much. It was nice meeting you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
So, it was very interesting to talk to Philipp, and I hope you enjoyed too, and you got interested about these things. And of course, we'll link Philipp LinkedIn on the podcast. You will find on Spreaker, you will find on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, and all the other platforms. So, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for listening us, for supporting us and this project. So see you or to hear you on the next podcast. Bye.